They said it couldn't be done. Military analysts called it a death sentence. In quiet rooms filled with maps and tension, experts studied every angle and still came to the same conclusion. Failure was inevitable. Even the commanders who drafted the plan quietly admitted the truth. This mission was never meant to succeed. Behind closed doors, doubt lingered in every decision, written into every line of the operation. It was labeled impossible before a single boot touched the ground. The air was thick with uncertainty, as if the outcome had already been decided long before the first move was made. And yet, when everyone else stepped back, a group of Filipinos stepped forward. While hesitation spread through the ranks, they chose action, stepping into the unknown without waiting for approval. What lay ahead was unforgiving. The terrain, the odds, the risks, everything about this mission pointed toward disaster, a challenge so overwhelming it seemed designed to break anyone who tried. But courage doesn't always look loud or heroic at first. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments, in the steady hands, the focused eyes, and the decision to move forward despite the fear. And then it began. Boots hit the ground, one after another, as the mission moved from theory to reality. There was no turning back now, only forward into uncertainty. Before we go further, pause for a second. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. Because stories like this connect people across the world in ways we don't always realize. As you listen, think about this. What makes ordinary people walk straight into something the world has already declared hopeless? What pushes them forward when logic says to stop? Because this isn't just a story about war or strategy. It's about courage that doesn't wait for permission, resilience that ignores the odds, and Filipinos who turned an impossible mission into something unforgettable. So sit back, because what comes next will take you through tension, sacrifice, and one of the most unexpected victories you'll ever hear about. The mission began as a desperate gamble. Intelligence reports painted a grim picture. A heavily fortified enemy position, surrounded by natural barriers and layered defenses that made any direct assault feel nearly impossible. Inside briefing rooms, analysts studied every detail, maps, reconnaissance images, and enemy placements, all pointing to one undeniable truth. The odds were overwhelmingly against them. Previous attempts by other units had failed. Some didn't even make it past the outer perimeter, leaving behind a stark reminder of how unforgiving this battlefield truly was. Supplies were limited. Every soldier knew resources wouldn't last long, and whatever they carried into the mission might be all they would ever have. Time was running out. With every passing moment, the pressure grew heavier, and failure would mean more than defeat. It would cost lives, territory, and morale. The operation demanded precision, speed, and an almost reckless level of bravery. Every movement had to be calculated, every decision final. So when the call went out for volunteers, there was silence. Not because there was no courage, but because everyone understood exactly what they were being asked to do. This wasn't a mission. It was a risk no one could justify. No one except a group of Filipinos who saw something different. They didn't see impossibility. They saw responsibility. While others focused on the risks, this group stood calm, grounded, steady, and ready to step forward. Many of them were not the most decorated soldiers. Some were young, others seasoned, but all carried a quiet confidence shaped by experience, not arrogance. They had trained under pressure, moving through harsh and unpredictable environments where survival depended on adaptation and quick thinking. More importantly, they had learned to rely on each other. Trust wasn't optional, it was everything, stronger than any weapon or equipment they carried. So when they stepped forward, it wasn't for glory or recognition. It was a decision made in silence, because they believed the mission had to be done right. Their commanders were hesitant at first. Watching from a distance, doubt lingered. Could this group really succeed where others had failed? But as plans were drawn and strategies discussed, something began to shift. Their approach was different, calculated, deliberate, and unexpected. These Filipinos weren't trying to overpower the enemy, they were trying to outthink them. The terrain alone was enough to stop most operations. Dense vegetation stretched endlessly, covering uneven ground and concealing narrow, unforgiving paths. Moving through it was slow and unpredictable. Every step had to be careful, every movement deliberate, as the environment itself resisted progress. Every step forward increased the risk of detection. One wrong move, one broken branch, and their presence could be exposed in an instant. And once detected, escape would be nearly impossible. The same terrain that concealed them could just as easily trap them. But instead of seeing the terrain as a disadvantage, the Filipino unit saw opportunity. Where others saw obstacles, they saw possibilities. They studied every inch of the environment, mapping out overlooked routes, tracking enemy patrol patterns, and uncovering weaknesses hidden in plain sight. They moved differently, blending into the terrain, using it for cover, turning its complexity into their shield. They understood something crucial. The same obstacles that made the mission impossible for others could become their greatest advantage. It wasn't about brute force, it was about using the environment as a weapon. Preparation was unlike anything the mission had seen before. This wasn't routine, it was a complete shift in how the operation would be approached. Instead of relying solely on standard procedures, the team adapted. Every move was shaped by the reality in front of them, not by what was written in manuals. They rehearsed movements in silence, executing each step with precision, building coordination without the need for words. Training pushed them into worst-case scenarios. Harsh conditions, limited visibility, and constant pressure, forcing them to prepare for anything. Communication was refined to the smallest detail. Hand signals replaced voices, every gesture carrying meaning that had to be understood instantly. Positioning and timing became everything. Each movement had to align perfectly, leaving no gaps, no confusion, no hesitation. There was no room for error. In a mission like this, one mistake wouldn't just affect one person, it would affect everyone. And yet, despite the pressure, there was a sense of calm among them. Not because they underestimated the danger, but because they trusted each other completely. The night of the operation arrived with an eerie stillness. No dramatic speeches, no last-minute changes, just quiet determination hanging in the air. In silence, they prepared, checking gear, tightening straps, exchanging brief, knowing glances. Every movement was controlled, every thought focused. As they moved into position, every sound felt amplified, the rustling of leaves, the shifting of gear, even their own breathing echoing in the darkness. Each step forward was a step deeper into uncertainty. But they didn't hesitate. They couldn't. Timing was everything, and precision meant survival. As they approached the outer perimeter, the first real test began. Enemy patrols moved unpredictably, turning every second into a calculation. But instead of panicking, they adjusted, using their training, their instincts, and their understanding of the terrain to remain unseen. Breaking through the first line of defense was something no previous unit had managed. Yet somehow they slipped past it, silent, precise, and completely undetected. Inside enemy lines there was no celebration, just quiet acknowledgement. A glance, a nod. They had done what no one else could, and the mission was still alive. It was a small victory, but a crucial one. The base remained unaware, the element of surprise still intact, and in a mission like this, surprise was everything. As they moved deeper, the challenges increased. More guards, more obstacles. Every step forward carried greater risk, and more chances for everything to fall apart. But with each challenge they adapted. They didn't follow the plan blindly, they evolved it in real time. And that adaptability became their greatest strength. At the heart of the mission was the objective, heavily guarded, layered with defenses, and positioned in a way that made reaching it seem almost impossible. From the shadows, they observed it carefully. Every guard movement, every light, every pattern, nothing was overlooked. This was where most operations had failed. But by the time they reached this point, they had already gone further than anyone before them. They had proven something critical. The mission wasn't impossible, it had simply been misunderstood. Now everything came down to execution. Using timing, coordination, and sheer determination, they moved. Every action calculated, every step precise, and when the moment came, they didn't hesitate. What happened next changed everything. The objective was secured, not through chaos but through controlled, precise action that shifted the entire course of the mission. It wasn't destroyed recklessly or attacked blindly. Every move was calculated, every detail handled with discipline and focus. It was the kind of execution that military analysts would later study for years, because it showed what was possible when strategy met precision. Against all odds, against all expectations, the mission had been completed. A moment that proved success wasn't just luck, it was earned. But the story didn't end there, because completing the mission was only half the battle. Now they had to get out. Extraction was just as dangerous as infiltration, if not more. The enemy was now on high alert, and the entire environment felt alive with tension. Patrols intensified. Movement increased. With every passing second, the risk of detection grew higher and harder to control. But the same strategies that got them in would get them out. With precision and adaptability, they began retracing their path, adjusting when needed. It wasn't easy. There were close calls, moments where everything could have gone wrong, where one mistake could have ended it all. But they held their composure. Because by now they weren't just executing a mission, they were proving something much bigger. When they finally crossed back into safe territory, the realization began to set in. The danger was behind them, and for the first time they could breathe. They had done it. Exhaustion showed on their faces, but so did something else, a quiet understanding of what they had just achieved. What was once labeled impossible had been accomplished. Not with noise or celebration, but with calm, controlled success. And not by overwhelming force or sheer numbers, but by strategy, adaptability, and trust. That was what carried them through. The mission became more than just a success, it became a statement. A reminder that sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't the challenge itself, but the belief that it can't be overcome. News of the operation spread quickly. What started as a dismissed mission was now capturing attention at the highest levels. Analysts who once doubted it were now studying every detail, trying to understand how something so unlikely had been achieved. Commanders examined the operation closely. Maps were revisited, decisions reanalyzed, and new perspectives began to take shape. Strategies were rewritten. Old assumptions were challenged, replaced by a new way of thinking, one built on adaptability and precision. Because what the Filipinos had achieved wasn't just a victory, it was a lesson. A reminder to think differently, trust skill over assumptions, and never underestimate what a determined group can accomplish. For the team, however, the recognition wasn't the point. They returned quietly, without celebration, focused only on the fact that the job had been done. They weren't heroes seeking attention, but professionals who had simply fulfilled their mission, carrying themselves with calm and humility. But their story couldn't be ignored. It was bigger than a single operation, something that naturally drew attention without them asking for it. Because what they represented was more than success. It was a mindset, a belief that no matter how impossible something may seem, there is always a way if you're willing to find it. And that's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about what happened, it's about what it means. Because impossible isn't a fixed reality, it's a perspective that can be changed. The Filipinos who took on this mission didn't have all the advantages. They didn't have overwhelming numbers, but they stood firm against something far greater. What they had was something far more important, a willingness to try when others wouldn't. And in the end, that made all the difference. So the next time you hear someone say something can't be done, remember this story. Remember that a mission once called impossible was completed by people who refused to accept that label. Because in the end, it's not about what others believe. It's about who's willing to step forward and prove them wrong. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments, and if this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and tell me your thoughts, because stories like this deserve to be remembered and shared with the world.